This budget hearing conducted by the Committee on Appropriation Adjudications will now reconvene. This afternoon, we have the Office of Technology. I think I'll dispense with reading of the opening statement and thank the Vice Speaker, Senator Morrison, and Senator Regine Biscoli for joining me this afternoon for this public hearing. Let's go straight to the testimony. Mr. Lujan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, Vice Speaker, Senator Morrison, Senator Lee. My name is Frank Lujan. I'm actually the Chief Technology Officer for the Government of Guam. I'd like to thank you first for the opportunity to present our budget today. I'm just really going to kind of cut to the chase, and if you could put up our presentation. I have a presentation that I put together now. I apologize, the first 8 pages are actually going to be in the back of the presentation, so if you start on page 8, we'll probably be in tune, and I'll finish off with the front. But in this presentation, I hope to kind of highlight a few things that the Office of Technology has been working on for the last year, and hopefully be able to address some of your questions regarding our budget. Okay, can we go into the next slide, please? Okay, one more time. Okay, if you can see that, this is a slide of all the different departments that we actually support within the government, all the different line agencies and their FTEs. So if you can go to the next slide, this is all listed. There's about 293 full-time people that we actually support out there that log into our network, that we generate paychecks for, that we support in one way, shape, or form in terms of providing them IT support. And it spans the Office of the Governor all the way through to the various agencies, Department of Agriculture, Department of Administration, and so on. Next slide, please. This slide represents a lot of the different applications that we support. The items that are highlighted in red are things that are actually going to be going live within the next few months or so. Starting from the first slide, we hope within the next 60 days to get the central public announcement website up and running. That's still through we're still working on some of the procurement of that, but we're hopeful we can get that up and running before the end of the fiscal year. With DRT, we have a few things that we're working on in terms of helping to modernize the interfaces as we collect the cash. When I came on board, the systems are actually separated, so we're working to kind of bring them together and merge them. We're slated for late next month. Right now, June 25th is our go-live date for working with the Real ID and actually getting the approval from all the different entities, from Homeland Security to the Social Security Administration. Again, with DOA, there's the TPS. Within the last year, we've also made some steps to modernize a lot of the way GSA does things in terms of moving from a lot of paper trail to where they're actually now processing through their digital documents. And then on the last part of the slide there, the public safety side, the electronic computer-aided dispatch system, which interfaces with all their law enforcement modules. We're hoping to go live. We have a go live date for June 19th. We have a whole team that will be actually going through the go live activities within the next week or so. So we're on track to launch that that particular product for the police department. Next slide, please. Okay, other agencies here, DPW, Veterans Affairs Office, the DLM, BSP, as well as OTech. A few things under the Veterans Affairs Office we hope to come to fruition in driving the online capability of the registry for veterans to actually be able to register with Guam. And the highlight there where it says Memorial app, that is an app that we're actually working on. We're hoping within the next month or so to get that launched, where it's an app that actually can locate loved ones within the cemetery, the veteran cemetery. With BSP, we're ongoing efforts to also modernize their website. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have the Department of Public Health and Social Services. We have a number of applications there that we support. Two things up there recently, towards the end of the fiscal year, we actually launched the transfer of the what's called the the EBT electronic bill transfer for the food information service, the FIS system. They moved from the vendor that previously supported them was Chase, who backed out of supporting the application. So we had to work and transition over to a new company called FIS Global, and that happened a few months back, about the beginning of the fiscal year. We recently signed another enhanced contract for WIC, WIC EBT electronic transfer. That has just recently signed by the governor, and we're actually going to be able to start implementation within the next week or so. Okay, next slide, please. So going into our budget summary, if you can go to the next slide. This is our slide, and this is the summary where we can contrast the difference between the 2 years. And basically with this slide, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, let's just home in a little bit. We have personnel services coming in at about 1.1. That's a variance of about $68,000 from the previous years. If we go down to the next slide, let's see if we can get in. There's 1.158 with that variance. Next, please. Operationally, our contractual is running at about 1.7, and that's a decrease of about $14,000 over the previous year. And if you go to the next slide, we've got a total budget of about 3.1 that we're asking for, in contrast with 3.4 that we had for last fiscal year. If you go on to the next slide for personnel. Next, please. This is a slide of all the personnel. We have 15 FTEs that we budget for. And if you go to the next slide. Okay, this is the list. Here are the different positions that we have right now. And all I can say right now is just because of the recent fiscal crisis, I'm not in a position where I'm presenting a much better staffing pattern at this point until we can actually work out the details on how we would fund that. But this is what we're presenting for staffing for the Office of Technology. Next slide, please. And then one more. So it's home in at 1.158 million for staffing. If you go to the next slide, last year we were budgeted for about $25,000 for travel to different conferences. We have no travel budget for we're submitting for FY19. So going on to the next slide, we're entering into our contractual, the 230. So next slide, please. Okay, this is we have about 28 line items here. If you go to the next one, you can see this a little bit better, but this is the list of the different contractual obligations that we require to actually run and operate the Office of Technology. So this whole list. And next slide, please. One more time. And again. Okay. So we're about $291,000 less from the fiscal year, last fiscal year. Next slide. We go into the variances with 230, and if you can go to the next slide, you can zoom in, and we can see the difference there. We made a few reductions on how we license our Active Directory and MS Exchange mail products in terms of coverage of different users. I believe we originally had it at 2,500. We scaled it down for now. And some of the licensing is actually distributed through the different agencies already. Okay. Next slide. So in the variances, you'll see one of the things we budget for is antivirus. And so this is an example of actually a recent report, an assessment summary of our vulnerabilities. So if you can go to the next slide. This is dated May 20th. Next, please. And this is called the Cyber Hygiene Assessment for the Government of Guam. And next slide. This is actually put out by Homeland Security. This is the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center that actually puts this out on a weekly basis. We monitor this report. It's about it originally started out as a 31-page report. We scaled it down to about half that. Next slide, please. This is an example of this is actually the actual report I'm using right now. And if you can home in one more time, next. This is the hygiene report card. Next, please. And this pretty much contrasts the vulnerabilities out there and their rating. We have actually 40 as of May 20th, and they're rated at 2 critical, 34 medium, and 4 low. Next slide, please. And this one contrasts, this is, one more time. This is a report of January 2016 when we first actually implemented this. And if you can see, our system's numbered about 221 vulnerabilities within our system. So we've been hard at work trying to keep it actually controlled and managed. Next, please. Another facet or dimension of our cybersecurity, this is a dashboard. I know it's kind of an eye chart here, but if you go in, next, please. This is one of the dashboards. We look at about 130 million files within our network to monitor for any anomalies and any kind of penetration of viruses. Next, please. This is we're running our threat protection is at 95%, and our device coverage is around 92. This happens to be the desktops that are out there throughout the whole Government of Guam wide area network. Next slide, please. This particular piece on the dashboard actually looks at the top 10 threats that are out there and that we're monitoring for. Next slide. And this is the activity. The colors kind of delineate the degree of the activity that's out there. Next slide, please. And these are the different threat classifications, from Trojan viruses to malware to these are all just the different levels of classifications. Next slide, please. And right now, this is pretty much real time. I pulled this dashboard off last night, so we had about 88 threats that were out there that we're managing to. Out of them, 85 are low, 1 high, and 2 are medium. Okay. Next slide, please. And this is a product called Cylance, and these are the dashboards. And if you can kind of go ahead and go to the next couple of slides. Running threats, 0 in the last 24 hours, next. Auto threats, next. Quarantine threats, and then lastly, threats that are unique to Cylance. Okay. Right now they're at 0. There's been times where we've gone as high as several hundred where we've been managing to. Next, please. Okay, so going into the next category, capital outlay. This is a short one. Go to the next slide. And with this slide, we are not, because of our priorities right now, we're just trying to stay operational. So we have not put in any budget for capital outlay at this time. So in contrast, last year we had $195,000 that we had requested and authorized, and we're going to keep our head above water and keep it at 0 at this point. Next slide. Okay, and now we're just kind of going into the first part of the mission, first part of these slides here that I handed out to you. And basically, I just wanted to speak a little bit about our mission. The Office of Technology will provide highly reliable, secure, cost-effective oversight, leadership, administration, and direction for activities relating to information technology to all agencies across the government of Guam. The office will, next slide, enable Guam agencies to better service the island. Next, please. Next slide. Island citizens, businesses, enhance the government of Guam technical infrastructure in order to attract business, improve access to information, and enhance educational opportunities for children and future generations. Next slide. Okay, our core values for our team members are the Office of Technology remains committed to supporting Government of Guam line agencies, other government entities, and our citizens obtain their business goals through technology. Next slide. Okay, and next one. Okay, we'll have a passion for our work and the success of others in Government of Guam community. Next, please. We will also work as a team and respect our coworkers and peers. Next. We'll pursue change and continuous improvement with a sense of urgency. We'll earn the respect of our end users and citizens by consistently delivering as promised. We will, next slide, we will hold ourselves accountable for everything we do. And let's see, next couple of slides, we'll leverage modern technologies and proven management methods in defining, designing, and delivering quality government to citizen solutions. Lastly, we'll be responsive to our end user needs based on their view of the business impact. And as we kind of finish up, next slide. These are our strategic goals. And we can go one more time. Next. So we can zoom in on that. Okay. Maintain the highest levels of customer satisfaction. That's one of our goals. Make government services more accessible. 3, implement common infrastructure and more modern application solutions. 4, ensure government of Guam's information assets are secured and privacy protected. Lower costs and improve the quality of Guam's technical infrastructure. And lastly, strengthen our technology workforce. So if we go on to the next slide. This is the Office of Technology. Next. Thank you, Sijo Swasi. I can open it up to questions.
I don't know if you have been watching the budget hearings that I've been conducting. It would seem to me that even if you don't have a television set at OTech, the live stream of our hearings would tell you that though you have your godfather and your godmother here who started OTech, this couldn't survive. This is grossly insufficient.
In terms of the numbers?
Well, not
Or
only
just
the
the
numbers, but
presentation?
also, I mean, it's great that you can do the PowerPoint presentation, but it's got to have substance. Your second mission is to enable GovGuam agencies to better service the island businesses and other interested parties. You mentioned earlier about revenue tax, about how you're going to be having real ID come this November. It's like 3 years late. There have been discussions, OPA audits that have been released in the last month that have talked about the problems of the connectivity between revenue tax, DPW, DLM. There's no discussion in here about how you're going to get them up and talking to each other so that we can get tax collections up.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually working with all of them. I don't have a narrative that can actually
I understand,
speak
but
to how
that's the thing that needs to be done, because I know that under the recent law that passed that OTech wasn't listed as up at the top, but it would seem to me that even for me, and I can't even figure out how to turn off the ringer in my phone, which is the reason why I have it stuck in my office right now. But the thing is that you've got to be able to come in here and explain to us why OTech should be right up there with revenue and taxation as the top 2 primary agencies for the government of Guam. Because unless revenue and taxation can collect the revenue, the rest of the government's not going to get funded. And the only way that revenue and taxation is going to be able to collect the revenue is if they bring themselves into the 21st century with the advice and guidance that you're going to provide them. But one-line half sentences in nice little boxes just doesn't do it for me. There's got to be more to it. And now I can understand, because one of my first questions was going to be, how is it possible that the budget, the executive budget request that came down to us in March has option 1 and option 2. Though I appreciate the fact that your amount is going down, I'm not penny wise and pound foolish to think that that's why we sponsored the bill together 6 years ago. Because even if I don't know how to use smartphones and I don't know how to use computers, I know what it's supposed to be and what it's capable of being able to do. But I don't understand how the budget request that could have come down from Adelup could have an option 2. The fact that OTech was willing to forego the AS400 maintenance at $470,000, was willing to forego the GSA procurement module for $39,000, the ESR GIS and enterprise license of $20,000, the financial transaction processing system of $96,000, and optic fiber network at $132,000. I don't understand how that could possibly, that you could have allowed that to have been cut in option 2.
Mr. Speaker, I don't really have answers at this point. Obviously there was no real substantial dialogue when those cuts were made. We were looking at what can we do to stay operational at this point, and I don't have much to say as far as those numbers. I was asked to cut the number, and there wasn't much in there. We're pretty skinny as it is.
No, we all realize that. We told you that last year. Your champion sitting next to me. And I support him in trying to figure out a way that we could bring you into the 21st century. My God, this doesn't even bring you into 1970 Fortran and Cobalt. But yet we're spending huge amounts of money in an email system which to me sounds a little, the gov.gu, the amount of money that you're spending in that, it would seem to me if you just let everybody just go out and get their own Gmail account, it'd be less expensive than the processing the 3,900 people that you have under you. I need to know how we can bring ourselves into the 21st century. And this budget just doesn't do it, and your presentation doesn't even support the meager amount that you're asking for. Can we just at least start with I guess I should have read my opening statement, because you have to build from the bottom up and explain to me why everything is important. Though I may understand how important your agency is, you've got to convince everybody else with a presentation of the evidence and the testimony.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to talk to any questions you might have regarding the budget that's there. I can't really speak to anything that's not there.
No, but the thing is that part of the problem that I have is that we are speaking to what is in the budget. And though I have many questions with some of the contracts that you're undertaking, whether or not they're cost effective, it just seems to me, at least for me, I need for you to come in here and say that I have been given the responsibility of the Office of Technology, which has as its mission to provide highly reliable, secure, and effective cost oversight, administration, direction for activities relating to information technology to all agencies, and that part of that mission is to enable us to public to be able to get contact, to be able to communicate. And I know that you've been given directions on what you can ask for. I'm just saying it seems to me that I can't be pulling teeth and saying, don't you need something else? Do we need to finally bury AS400 and find something else? Do we need this? Unless somebody wants to continue, I have a whole series of questions, but it seems to me that we'd be better off rescheduling your hearing and having you write us a budget that would explain to us how you believe the Office of Technology would be able to make this government more effective and efficient. How you can get revenue and taxation to talk to land management, to talk to DPW, so we don't have condominiums going up that are built, that DPW knows about, that land management knows about the land, but revenue and taxation doesn't. What kind of system do we need to get that up? Many of my colleagues have been freaking out about how we can't get online filing or pay online. How would you be able to get that TPS to get into the 21st century? Because what you presented to me, no. I'll allow somebody else to ask questions first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lawn, Mr. Manabusan, for the presentation. I know this is the first budget hearing for Office of Technology. However, I think it was very clear in the budget law of 2018 that we try to assist OTech in preparing to provide a updated staffing pattern or how budget requests. I think the key word there was updated, because we understand that we were in the middle of at one point a process and dealing with I believe a budget that does not meet the demands of this government today as far as respect to OTech. So I just look at the staffing pattern here, Mr. Lohan, and I'm just kind of puzzled because I did participate in a presentation where you presented a well thought out roadmap going forward for Office of Technology, as the chairman was speaking towards and where will we see the OTech, you know, in 3, 5, 10 years from now. I'm looking at staffing, and I'm just kind of surprised looking at the staffing being requested or the budget being requested, because we asked, I was looking forward to an updated, even if it was to be provided with zero funding, it was still would have been an updated staffing pattern that will at least know that this committee or future legislatures will be able to incrementally budget to support the mission and objectives of OTech going forward in accordance to the roadmap. And when I look at the staffing pattern, and I don't think this would be able to get the roadmap off the ground or sustain it, knowing I'm looking at a staffing pattern here that you and I understand is obsolete and needs updating. So I'm not sure what the message was given from the administration and how to proceed, because I know that you also presented that roadmap to the administration, and I'm just concerned what direction we're trying to take here. Are there plans to provide this committee with an updated budget request that includes the presentation recently regarding the roadmap going forward, and it spelled out how the organizational chart should look like to meet the demands of this government? Again, I know for a fact that we can't budget OTech fully overnight, but we do need some kind of guidance from the Office of Technology to know where we're going in the future. And like I said, things can be done incrementally. And I think I mentioned that a couple of times, that I really believe is your opportunity, given that it is in the budget law of 2018, for OTech to provide a clear, updated staffing pattern, and that includes position that we can't, those that are filled already, we can't, unless we transition those positions. But I still believe that there should have been an effort to provide an updated staffing pattern. How are we moving forward with that roadmap given this budget request? How will we move forward?
Well, with respect to this particular request, I pretty much stuck with the numbers that were given to me just to stay operational. I still have the vision plan, if you will, with the staffing pattern and the direction. It has not been fully vetted with the fiscal team at this point, and until then, I'll be ready to present that. But I do have a plan with all the elements of where we should go. But I do admit that this budget fails that particular plan. But at this point, it's the numbers, in my opinion, were numbers that were just designed to keep us operational and not necessarily addressing all the direct needs that we have. So I think that's the whole budget request has taken that mode from option 1 to option 2. So until we can figure out a way to fund that roadmap, and I have ideas, and I need to vet those ideas with our fiscal team as well as with the legislature. But I didn't have the impression, just by watching the different testimonies, that I had to prepare that vision at this point. I was just speaking to the numbers that were given me, and I'm prepared just to speak to those things. But again, the vision, I still have the vision that's important, that was placed in front of you back in December during our testimony, and how that's going to translate into the budget. That's something for us to work out collectively.
I mentioned this earlier, the budget hearing this morning, that this is my 6th year, my 3rd term, my final term. And I was very excited to be here today because on my way out, I'm getting the opportunity to see OTech for the first time present its budget, defend its budget. I understand you being in those positions or those chairs before and having to work with numbers or given a ceiling to work with. However, it's still incumbent on the office to present where you need to take this office going forward, because it does, especially with OTech in this day and age, to deal with an obsolete budget request. I think it should be very clear that OTech can make it known to us that this is something that I'm working with, and like you said, but here is the updated staffing pattern as required by law, to make sure we know what positions are going to be looked at to be filled in the future. And this is where it's done. This is where it's done, and how we will know what type of positions will be needed to support cybersecurity initiatives, or web platforms that need to be upgraded, applications. And I know this is going to require the necessary IT skills that we'll have to build in this government to help support those initiatives. And I'm just very, I'm not sure what direction to take the office. This body has been really working together to help support Office of Technology, and again, this is, again, I'm just very shocked. I participated in a very like a well thought out plan, and I'm just not sure how this connects anymore. But I do hope that there could be an updated staffing pattern that could be provided here. Where do we go? Like, again, I know we don't have all the resources, but I know what it's like to provide staffing patterns that were zeroed out or don't have the funding to support it, but at least we know that these are positions in the future or in the next phase, or when there's resources available, we can support the Office of Technology. There's nothing here that gives us room to support the Office of Technology or the roadmap. Should you want to carry out some of them tomorrow or a year from now. So again, even like I wanted to discuss the efficient payment system or cash management, that again, we put it in the budget law. That basically gives OTech, DOA, BBMR the lead to finally get an efficient cash management system down. But again, I'm not sure where we're going to go from here. With the discussions of the administration, is there room, and was there any support for that roadmap? Because you listed all the staffing, you listed the potential or for funding needs. Maybe we could do this phase in fiscal 2019. I mean, was there any room to support that?
Well, I can say that the dialogue is there. The specifics on how we're going to fund it is not at this point. So, the vision is there. The discussions about the support is there. We just need to get to the next step as far as the specifics. I'm ready in terms of all the different components except for the funding, and we just need to agree on the strategy of the funding. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I understand. I mean, you're working with a ceiling, and this is the numbers you have, and according to your staffing, how would you see us going forward, trying to address the Office of Technology's roadmap going forward, as far as the organizational structure, modernizing it, the staffing? How it's really your job to tell us how do we transition, because this is, I'm not sure how this body would transition, or its committee. We've gone to the point now where we allow OTech to defend its budget before committee members and see how we can help. But is there a plan to transition? How do we do this?
As far as a transition plan, I'm not prepared today to speak to that. I can be and will be. I've had intentions of speaking to the transition piece. I was just not under the impression that this was the forum for that.
Okay, well, maybe I'll come back, Mr. Chairman. I understand this is the first go around for OTech, to be here and defend its budget. But I think the things are very spelled out in the budget law that gave OTech that flexibility to come before this body and present an updated budget request. So that way we know. That way we really know. What would it look like, versus just sending us something we already know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Lujan, and all your staff that are here for your testimony. I have a completely different outlook on what you have presented. I thought it was very responsible and very responsive. And I noticed as to staffing that there are 5 vacancies that are listed in option 1 that you just didn't put on your slide, but they actually do exist. Those positions exist. There are vacancies, and I think if your budget was increased, those still exist, so you would be able to either look at that or increase contractual, whatever you determine. But you're a brand new agency, so I appreciate it that you gave us your mission, because these things are all new now, right? Your mission, the core values of your team members, which I thought were excellent, by the way. They really showed, I thought, and your strategic goals, but I thought that that you put a lot of thought into this, and that you showed to the public that you are trying to be very, very responsible in these times, and you heard what we heard, that we are in a fiscal crisis, and I thought that you were being very responsive to that.
Yes.
And because all of your core values really, to me, I wish every government agency had these values and really stuck to it. The fact that you point these things out, such as consistently delivering as promised, is, to me, they were relevant because these are what the public is not satisfied with in government. So I think you've done a good job of I don't want to take up the time to repeat them all, but I think they bear repeating, because they really do show that you have thought what is making people dissatisfied with the government, and that you've really honed in on that. And I thought the same when you presented your list of, what are they called, OTech support coverage, and pretty much they're agency by agency, all the projects that OTech is currently involved with. And if you could just clarify for the record, what is the difference between the blue and the red in the listing of OTech coverage projects?
No real difference, except for I just wanted to highlight that those are some projects that are actually going live.
All right.
And in the near future, within the next few months.
Yeah, because you didn't read these all, but if you read the whole list, it's very impressive, right? A brand new agency, you're involved in all of these things, and I'm sure because, you are newly involved, you are reviewing kind of, even if the government of Guam had already been operating with these types of systems, that you had to review them anew. Right? And
that's correct.
So that everything that you're reporting, that you're giving coverage, you're pretty much putting your word behind that you've looked at these. And when you say you're giving coverage to it, that we're having a reanalysis of all of the technological involvement that the government of Guam is in, and they're significant. And so your highlight, I think you're just kind of shy But I think these are very significant accomplishments if your small team has been able to review all of these, make sure they're efficient, and I know that's one of the things that we're looking to you for. And you've added on some just recently, right? And so I very much appreciate it. And I think, of course, the speaker saying that there are audits that say we could be more efficient still, and I know you know that. And I think we're all anxious to hear perhaps if you had to prioritize, right? So I was curious about the ones you did list. Do you still feel these are all necessary? And I hope that if you find they are not, that you tell us, or if you can do it on your own, that you deprioritize these things, or make recommendations to us consistent with what you have done. I think every time you've appeared here, you've been very frank. Pardon the pun, but you've been very, you've been very honest with us. I thought straightforward, and you tell us, that this is efficient and this is not. And so I just thought that your presentation was very efficient, and I hope that you continue to do that. And so when you look at these projects that are here, I was going to ask you, but I'm just going to, you can submit that whenever it comes comes to you that there is a way to improve any of these. I trust you for that, right? That if you are providing coverage for all of these, particularly like GSA procurement, it says, GSA procurement modernization on base. And I know this is relatively new.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and you've highlighted it in red because it's something you're proud of that you are succeeding in. But is this the same project that was zeroed out in option number 2? In the budget request option number 2? The one that the speaker is referring to, some GSA procurement?
It probably is, yes.
All right, well then, I guess, to me, those are the only questions. So you've done a good job with this project, but do you think it should be deprioritized?
No, I don't.
All right, I didn't think so either, because I've heard a lot about the GSA, and that's really their hope, is that this project is going to make them efficient, and that all the complaints we've been hearing from government agencies, not all, but many, many, many of them are going to be resolved through this. It's an accountability system for agencies and GSA to show us, who are we waiting on, and what exactly, right?
Yes, it is.
Are we waiting on? So I'm thinking, yeah. So with this budget that you've been capped by BBMR to do all these projects, and with the staff that you have currently, I thought it was good. I think if there's anything else that you want to recommend to us, for example, my own list of priorities was, I was going to tell you the revenue enhancements, right? So if we wanted to prioritize like one additional project, what would it be in your opinion that would, consistent with the audits that we've seen, and maybe other things that you've just been in discussions with these agencies, what would that be? And I don't know, otherwise I appreciate your approach that it's got to be project by project, because that's how these things are organized in the government, and if you find another way to organize them, then I am expecting that you will let us know this, but just want to make sure that I asked you all my questions. I want to thank you particularly for the collaboration with the Guam Veterans Affairs Office, the registry, and the memorials. That's really very important to the veterans to be able to find loved ones. And I just think it may look like a small project, but that is huge. It's been years and years and years since anything like that was done. And it's going to make a big impact on their lives. So I appreciate that you put that in your list of priorities. And there are other things, like the public notice website, another small project, I think, in the big scheme of things, but one of the projects that's going to make huge impact in people's lives, because they will be able to know in an organized way what's going on in their government and how they can participate. I think that's very, very important. So I also appreciate that you put that into your priorities list, and I'm looking forward to the completion of that. What was the capital outlay that in between, in both options, it went from 195,000 to zero. Maybe 2018 you had capital outlay of 195,000, and so I know you explained to us that you weren't going to have any, but what are we foregoing by letting go of that from the 2018 budget?
Well, potentially, we have a lot of systems that are actually going end of life, so they don't last forever. So part of capital outlay, is programmed for us to at least replace these systems. We have systems that are going down all across the network, and we do our best to try and keep them going with what we have in our budget. But with that, and as well as the expansion that needs to occur when you do digitize processes. For example, GSA will continue to grow from a digital standpoint. They'll need more processors, more storage capability, and we're experiencing that across the board. Is once we successfully get them into a process where they're scanning or they're digitizing documents, that gets problematic for our infrastructure because we need places to store it, back it up, and continue to make it resilient. Excuse me.
Yes. All right. Well, again, those were all my questions. It was pretty much because things had decreased. It's where were those decreases and why? But I was very impressed that you were able to pinpoint for us that if we have to cut, right, then where we could do that. And so I appreciate that. I think, things are very difficult to cut. And I'm not saying that's what we want to do with your agency, but if we had to, I think that's the mentality, or that's the kind of, marching orders that everyone received is we may have to cut. Where would you do that? And so I appreciate the choices you made. And I don't agree with just filling personnel for the sake of growing an agency at this time, right? If you can focus on the revenue enhancing projects, the cost saving measures like you have been, then I'm all for that. And I appreciate your bearing with the fiscal crisis to get this done. But I appreciate the accomplishments that you have made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Lujan, and for your team for joining us. And we had an opportunity to sit down and look through your budget last week, so many of my questions were answered at that meeting. But I do want to share some of the concerns that were brought up at that meeting, as well as by Senator Morrison, about your strategic plan. And having seen that and seeing where the Office of Technology could potentially go in the next 5 to 10 years, and your phased approach that we discussed, I think that I have a lot of hope for that, and I really think that it would be an excellent return on investment for taxpayers to have just a much better streamlined system where different agencies, and I think the speaker alluded to this too, where they communicate, because there's so many different gaps in between these silos that we're working on, and if we're not communicating, money's going out the door. And so I can really see how in an overall kind of strategic system that can really be improved on a number of different levels, and it can really help to have a better return on investment for taxpayers. One thing that I did appreciate that you went through on your report is the cybersecurity hygiene report. And I think when you really think about the return on investment in this particular case is huge. If a workstation, let's say at the Department of Labor is down, or Department of Revenue and Tax, it's very, very costly to the government. It's costly to have that government employee unable to access their email, or to get a lot of the work that they need to do done. And I think that, that trickles down to customer service, that can impact fines and fees and taxes that were collected. So I agree with the Vice Speaker when she's asking you, and I want to also ask you to please prioritize the work that you do with these for revenue enhancements. We want to make sure that every opportunity that we have to bring those dollars into the government of Guam, and if that means that, we want to ensure that land management is talking to DPW, is talking to Department of Revenue and Taxation, that linkage really, really needs to happen. Sure. So I want to urge you to continue to work on those things. Another point that I think would be helpful for people watching on TV, but also for my colleagues to understand, that we had we spent a good time talking about, was that you have recently applied for some federal grant funding and you're anticipating some of that coming in. You told me about a grant that you received in the amount of $455,000, and that's an infrastructure power equipment switch upgrade grant. Correct. Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that grant and then just give us some update about the DOI grants. I think it was a $1.4 million grant, and some of the other things that you're anticipating to potentially receive, and how that can impact your current staffing pattern, if you could just give us an update.
Well, with respect to the infrastructure grant that we received earlier last year, that was actually in response to a recent failure that we had back in 2016 with our power systems, where most of our one of the key pieces of our main system was actually damaged by the power surges. And so we were on backup for about 2.5–3 months. And so as a result of that, we had applied for a grant, pulled the narrative together, and actually received funding to replace the UPS batteries, make some redundancies in place, and as well as some rewiring of the electrical. One of the things that we discovered in our infrastructure is that we had procured 4 redundant power systems, but we had no redundant power system. So we have one side that was powered, the other side was not. So this was a grant that helped us bridge that gap and pull it all together. As a follow-through, we recently applied for several different grants in April. I believe there was a DOI deadline of April 1st where we applied for a grant to actually enhance and upgrade the current system on what's called the Power 7 system to the new Power 9 systems. Primarily, that was something that we needed to do because the Power 7 systems are approaching their particular end of life, as well as their operating system. So,
and those are servers that Department of Administration and Department of Revenue and Tax uses? That's correct. Okay.
So those servers, that's in the neighborhood of about $1.4 million in grants for that. We're hopeful that we'll at least get approval for some of that. We also applied for enhancing a lot of the technical infrastructure with our phone systems, where we're looking at the vision of going with voice IP-driven technology as opposed to the current technology that's in place with the different agencies using more of the wired systems, if you will. We did the calculations for that, and we're looking at getting our return of investment in that particular project in about 2.5 years. And that's leveraging IP, voice over IP, and the newer technologies that are out there.
You also spoke about a grant for network monitoring and then maintenance assistance program for techs. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think it was like a toolkit for troubleshooting.
Yeah, most of that was through the maintenance assistance program, where we don't have our own vehicles, and we cover the whole span of the islands. I have several techs. We have 4 or 5 techs that go to different venues where they have issues with the network or their desktops or that kind of thing. And so we've never had our own vehicles. So we're hoping to, through that grant, to get vehicles as well as tools for our techs to actually, diagnose and help become more efficient out there in the field.
Thank you, Mr. Lujan. On page page 23, it's actually page 12 in our packet, but page 23 on your slides, you have the listing of all the employees in your agency. Number 15 is listed as a position for an agricultural gardener and with a salary of $37,000. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that, if you could expound on the agricultural gardener for Office of Technology.
This is actually a classified position that was, this person was originally assigned to the ITC building. They don't have any garden there at the, basically, we brought, that person was transferred so that he can actually maintain the existing building that we have in there. We're the only ones that didn't have anybody that actually could maintain the building in itself. That's where the data center is located. So the data center has its own yard, it has its own restroom facilities and that kind of thing.
So this was transferred from a previous employee that was classified, and so this position description isn't everything that this person does, is what you're saying? This person's now kind of like a maintenance supervisor?
That's correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm very glad to hear the Vice Speaker his comments. And, she was one of the few in there that was making it very challenging for me. One of my measures to make Office of Technology a standalone agency. So I appreciate her comments. Mr. Lund, I'm just trying to point out, there's a lot of work you've put into this advancement of where we should be with IT in this government. And I'm just looking at this roadmap going forward. I've been looking at it since the day you presented it. And I'm bringing it up because what I was trying to point out, so the Vice Speaker does understand, is some of the positions here that were put in the updated or proposed plan, even if there was room for this legislature, not to say there'll be any new money, but if we had to move money around, or we found savings somewhere and go to a priority within the Office of Technology to address our IT needs in our government, we wouldn't know how to maneuver with this budget. That's my point. And maybe going forward, what we can have an understanding is maybe there has to be a presentation going forward with, again, to update this committee. I won't be here for the next budget, but I sure hope that come time, it's 6 years already since this office has been created, we really would like to know, based on our limited resources, where can we, like I said earlier, incrementally start supporting this roadmap going forward, and have an understanding how we can grow the IT workforce in the government and bring it to up to date. I pointed out earlier of DPW's master plan that sat for a while. We're talking about the Hogotnya revitalization plan that's, I hope doesn't sit for another 10 years, and there can be efforts to support those plans. And I just don't want this plan to sit too long. And again, there's reasons why we made the Office of Technology a standalone agency, because we felt that maybe there were some restrictions being built into another agency that made it hard for the Office of Technology to move forward. And I think this is something that I'm not shy to put on the record, because I wanted this budget, this first budget, just tell us this is how this office should look. And yeah, maybe the Vice Speaker said maybe, Mr. Lon, you're shy to tell us that, but I'm sure you know there's another way this office should look today to help support all these initiatives that we need to get to include the OPA's recommendations. And certainly, I'll, as long as I'm here, I'll do my part. But I think working with the Speaker, we've been doing our part to let this office loose. And I don't know where else the restrictions are, because we now are allowing you and your team to come here and tell us, where this office should be. I understand it's new, but as far as the budget, but I think the office has been around long enough to know and tell us where we should help. But again, it's challenging. Like, even if we went into the budget process, I wouldn't know where to put savings here. Okay. And that's why I'm just a bit concerned. Okay. Thank you. But thank you for your work, sir, and I appreciate the roadmap. I hope the administration would bless it and support this office. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe my contacts are out. I don't know. We'll recess this hearing until tomorrow morning at 10, when we meet with the Department of Public Works.